All right, today we're diving deep into the microscopic world of the cell. We're going to uncover its amazing and super sophisticated control system. We're talking about enzyme regulation, which is basically the cell's secret rulebook for preventing total chaos. So let's just start with this question. Think about it. Your body has trillions of cells, and every single one is like this buzzing city of chemical reactions. We're talking thousands of them happening every single second. So how on earth does it manage all of that without just exploding into pure chemical anarchy? You know, the best way to picture this is to think of a cell as a really, really efficient factory. It has to build very specific things, amino acids, nucleotides, all that good stuff, but only at the right time and only in the right amounts. The whole game is about managing its resources and its production lines perfectly. Now, inside this factory, things don't get made all at once. Nope. They're built on what's basically an assembly line, and we call it a metabolic pathway. You start with one material, an enzyme modifies it, then the next enzyme takes over, and so on until you get your final crucial product. It's this really neat step-by-step process. But here's the problem every factory faces, right? What happens when the warehouse is totally full? If the cell has made plenty of what it needs, keeping that assembly line running is just a massive waste of energy. So how does the factory manager, the cell, know when to tell all the workers, all right, guys, take a break? Well, this is where the managers come in. These aren't your average, everyday enzymes on the line. No, these are the ones with the real power. They're the ones who can control the pace of the entire operation. Yep, these are our regulatory enzymes. Their whole job is to listen for signals and then hit the gas or slam on the brakes for the entire pathway. And here's the really clever part. They are almost always the very first enzyme in the whole assembly line. It just makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You shut things down right at the beginning before you've wasted a single resource. So how do these enzyme managers actually do their job? Well, the cell has two main tricks up its sleeve. Let's start with the first one, which is kind of like having a dimmer switch for a light.
The fancy name for this is allosteric regulation. And here's the key. A little signal molecule comes along and binds to the enzyme, but, and this is super important, it doesn't bind to the active site, the part that does all the work. It binds to a totally separate spot, a regulatory site. And that little connection makes the entire enzyme change its shape. That shape change can either turn its activity way up or dial it way down, just like a dimmer switch. And since it's not a permanent bond, the signal can come and go, making the control really fluid and responsive.
And we're not talking about simple little tools here. These things are complex, beautiful machines. Just look at this classic example, aspartate transcarbamylase. It's a monster. You can clearly see it's got different parts for different jobs. The business end where the reaction happens, and then completely separate sections that act as the receiving dock for those dimmer switch signals. Okay, so this all leads to a really elegant idea called feedback inhibition. It's brilliant. Check out this pathway to make the amino acid isoleucine. When the cell has made enough of it, the isoleucine itself, the final product, is the signal. It floats all the way back to the very first enzyme in the line, latches on, and basically says, hey, we're good for now, you can take a break. The product literally shuts down its own assembly line. How cool is that? It's a perfect self-regulating loop. And you can actually see why this is so powerful when you look at the data. A normal enzyme, on the left, has this smooth, predictable curve. But look at the allosteric enzyme on the right. See that S shape? That's the magic. There's this sweet spot right in the middle where a tiny little nudge, a small change in the signal, causes a huge jump in activity. It makes the system incredibly responsive. The cell can go from 0 to 60 or back down again super fast. But, you know, a dimmer switch isn't always what you need. Sometimes you don't want to just dim the lights. You want to flip them off completely. And that brings us to the cell's second big strategy, the on-off switch. This one's called covalent modification, and it's a whole different ballgame. Instead of a signal just temporarily docking, another enzyme comes in and physically glues a chemical group right onto our manager enzyme. We're talking a strong covalent bond. It's not subtle at all. It's like flipping a big, chunky power switch. And the cell has a whole bunch of different chemical tags it can use for this, things like methylation or adenylation, but the undisputed king of all of them is phosphorylation. That's just adding a phosphate group. It sounds simple, but this one mechanism is so unbelievably important, it's used to control something like half of all the proteins in your cells. Just incredible. A perfect example is this enzyme, glycogen phosphorylase. Its job is to free up sugar for energy. In its normal state, it's pretty lazy, not really doing much. But then another enzyme comes along and, bam, it slaps this big, bulky, charged phosphate group onto it. That forces a massive shape change, and suddenly it's in its super active form, ready to work. And of course, there's another enzyme that can come along and snip that phosphate off to turn it back off again. It's a classic, clear-cut on-off system. Okay, so we've got our dimmer switches and our big on-off switches. But why does the cell need both of these systems? Why is this whole control scheme so absolutely critical for, well, for life itself? Let's just put it all together. It really comes down to efficiency and adaptation. Regulation stops the cell from just wasting precious energy making stuff it doesn't need. The dimmer switches, that's allosteric regulation. They're for all the quick, subtle, moment-to-moment adjustments. The on-off switches, covalent modification. That's for the big, decisive commands. Having both of these gives the cell the incredible flexibility it needs to respond perfectly to whatever life throws at it. So in the end, these tiny molecular managers, these regulatory enzymes, are really the unsung heroes inside every one of our cells, keeping that whole factory running smoothly. Which leaves us with one last pretty important thought. If these little managers are so vital for keeping us healthy, what happens to the factory when they mess up? That very often is where disease begins.